Hey, welcome back. In this episode, we're going to introduce Laravel components. Now, component is another blade construct, and we're going to use this concept to refactor our views. Right now in our survey, we have a bunch of questions, which really are templates. There's one example for every type of question, but in the future, we want to have maybe multiple star ratings or multiple sliders. And so to get to that point, we need to refactor those questions into components. And that's what we're going to be doing in this video. And I think the most important thing to understand about concept is this first bullet point here. Components are reusable UI building blocks that encapsulate HTML styling and logic. And Laravel supports two types of components. There are class-based components and then there are anonymous components. So we'll take a look at both of those in the docs. So here's the documentation on class-based components. It takes you through an example of how to create one. We're going to go through those examples in a little bit. And again, if you're ever looking for more detailed information on components, you should definitely visit the documentation. And then down here is the documentation for anonymous components. And again, if you're interested in the details, check out the documentation pages. I'm going to close this down for now. And just to summarize, you have this class-based components and then the anonymous components. And the difference is these class-based components are going to have a backing PHP class where you can do more in-depth logic. If you don't have a need for that in-depth logic, then you can just use the anonymous components. They don't have the backing class, and these are perfect for kind of simple UI-based elements. And when in doubt, you could always start with a class-based component, and then if you find out that you're not using that class, just delete the class, and then you'll end up with an anonymous component. So we're going to go through a couple of examples here. So this is a class-based component example, and you can use the PHP artisan command to make a component, and this component is going to be called alert. Now, when you create a component in this way, you're going to get the class-based components, and this is going to generate two files. It's going to generate an app/view/components. It'll create that directory for you, and then it's going to put inside that directory an alert.php. This is the backing class. Now, the backing class comes with a default constructor. It doesn't have any arguments. I added those arguments for this specific example. It will stub out a render function, and that render function is going to render a specific view, which is the second file. You can see the second file on this side. It's going to generate a resources/views/components, and then it's going to create this blade template for you. Alert.blade.php. Again, this is not the exact markup it generates. I generated this markup for this particular example. And you can see in this markup, we're accessing the type and the message variables. And because we created our constructor using this syntax with public string and public string, these properties will automatically be created on the component as public properties, and they will automatically be accessible inside of your view. Once you've created this component, then you can use this in any other blade templates that you want. And how you use this is you have this new markup. You have an x-alert tag that you can now use, and you can set attributes which turn into the variables for the constructor. Now do notice anytime you want to use a variable here or an expression, you need to have the colon syntax. So prefix that attribute with a colon. But that's an example of a class-based component. Let's take a look at the anonymous component example. It starts out almost exactly the same way, except for we're going to add a --view option to let Laravel know that you only want the view for this component. Laravel will automatically generate a component file for you. This is the blade template that we're going to generate here from this particular request. And I added a bunch of markup in here. Now, one of the main differences between an anonymous component and a class-based component is how you get data into the component. In the class-based example, any public properties that were part of the class are automatically going to be accessible inside of the markup. You can also feed additional data in terms of an array as a second parameter as part of this view call. With anonymous-based components, you have to declare them at the very top using this @props declaration. And that lets the blade templating engine know that you're going to be using these variables inside of this component. And then once you have your anonymous component, you use it just like you use a class-based component. Is you have a new bit of markup, and so you can use an x-page-header in this example, and then you use attributes on that element to feed in the data for the properties. Now that we have an understanding of what components are and how to create them, let's think about our specific case. Eventually, we're going to have many different components, but for this video, I want to focus in on those question types. When you take a look at the survey we currently have, you can see, for example, that this darker well, which is a section, has two questions in it. The first question is this rate your last experience, where you get to select one from a list. And then there's this other question here at the very bottom, which is what areas should we improve most, which you get to select one from a drop-down. So those are two different question types. Select one from a list and select one from a drop-down. And there are other question types. For example, the next page we see here's another question, and this is a select multiple from a list. And then we have another question type as an email, and then here's another question type as a URL. And if you go through all the rest of the questions in this particular example, you can see stars, you can see dates, here's a text entry. You'll end up with this list. And so I've compiled this list of question types. And the code changes I want to do in this video is I want to take each of these question types and I want to create a question component. And I'm just going to keep this naming convention. So I have this select one list question. We're going to create a select one list component. I also know in a couple of videos I want to land in a particular spot. And so I'm going to generate anonymous components for each of these. And it'll become obvious why I did this in probably the next video. So at this point, let's roll up our sleeves. Let's go on over to our development environment and let's make this work. So we have our survey blade, and right now we refactored this already to use the layout, and there's this form, and inside the form we have a number of sections, and each section has a header, but then each section contains a number of different questions. So here's the first question that we have, which is the select one from a list. And so we're going to go through converting this particular question in detail together, and then the rest I'll probably just use the magic of the video and fast forward through all of that, and we'll review what we have at the end. So let's go ahead and do this one together. I'm going to come over to my app, and I'm going to use my PHP artisan command, and we're going to make a component. And then this one is going to be the select one from a list component, and we are going to just ask for the view. So when I hit enter here, Laravel is going to create a new directory under views, and it's going to place my component in that directory. So let's go ahead and do that. So now you can see I have this new components directory, and inside here I have that component that we just created, the select one list component. Now if I open up this file, we're going to see the markup that it gave us here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to my survey, and we're going to carve out this markup for this question, and I'm going to remove it from here, and I'm going to paste it over here for now. Now this isn't exactly where we want to land yet, but I want to incrementally build this out. So I come back over to my survey, and if I went to the application right now, obviously this question would be gone, but now I want to use my X select one from the list component. After I've saved this, my app server is still running, and I go back to my application and we'll refresh this. Let's get back to the first page here, and you can see that I still have this select one from the list example. Let's go back to our code, and let's do this for now. We can start to see the power of using these components. If I duplicate this a couple of times and I save this, and then we go back and we look at our survey, you can now see that I have those duplicated questions here. Now at this point they're all the same. It's still the same question. It has the same options here. So let's work on that next. Let's come back into our code. I'm going to get rid of this duplication. We don't need that. But what I want to do now is focus in on the actual markup here that's part of this component. And again, we're going to work in steps here. At the very top, I'm going to add a little PHP section. We're not ready to factor out any properties at this time. I'm just going to do it like this. And then when I look at this, I can see, for example, some hard-coded data that probably shouldn't be hard-coded. So here is the question itself. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to come up here. Let's just make a question variable that will have that, and instead of here we're going to use blade, and we'll just emit this question. So I've just made a simple change. Let's just go back and make sure that we're still functioning. If I refresh, you can see that I still have my question in place. So let's continue on. Here you can see I have a bunch of repeated options that are going to be the list that I can select from. So it ranges from very satisfied, satisfied, neutral, dissatisfied, and very dissatisfied. And when you think about it, those are really the allowed values. So what if we come up here, we make an array of allowed values, and I take every one of these and we're going to move them up to here. All right, so now I've got my array at the very top that has my allowed values. And let's just do a little bit of examination here to make sure these are all unique. So I don't see any differences in the top yet. And then the next one, the inputs. So they have this name here. We're going to need a variable for that eventually. They have a value, which is not the same as the text. I think we can get away with just using the actual text as the value. That's fine. And then we have the span. Okay, so let's go ahead and make a first stab here. We are going to have a for each blade allowed values as allowed value. We're going to take one of these as our template. We're going to get rid of the rest because they're all the same. And let's just go through and change what we need to change here now. We're going to come back to name in a little bit. The value is going to be the allowed value. Here we are going to put in the allowed value. So let's make that as our first step. I saved. I'm going to go back to our application. And then you can see that nothing has really changed visually here. So I can still go and select one of those allowed values. But my markup is getting more and more refactored. Now there is one more thing I want to deal with in this video is this name. Right now this is hard-coded to satisfaction. Obviously if I want to make this generic, I have to come up with some kind of solution here. And I don't have the exact answer yet because we don't have the data model yet. But for now, let's just go ahead and we're going to put a question ID up here. And for now, I'm going to hard-code this as satisfaction. Later on, this is probably going to be something that's related to our database ID. And we're going to go ahead and put question ID in here. I think we're looking pretty good. There's one more thing I'm going to add here that isn't in this particular case, but maybe we are going to have an is required flag. And we'll put this as true for now. And then as part of the input, we need to emit that required property. So I can use a blade if is required. We're going to put the required tag and we'll close out our end if. Maybe a little spacing just to make it more readable. I don't think you need it, but I like that there. And so let's go back into our question. And now this is required. This is not this little asterisk. Let's see if we can steal this from this particular question, which is the next one, and add it to our question label. Let's go back to our survey. Where is that at? Here, this little extra span on the end. Let's add that into our markup here. And this is only going to be there if is required to the end if. So I save. Okay, so it looks like PHP Storm wants to reformat this for me. I don't particularly like how it's split it, so I'm just gonna do this. I don't want to fight with that for right now. But now I do have in this particular component this red asterisk if this is required. So let's go back on over and see if we're seeing that. And indeed we are. So now we're seeing that that is a required field. And let's just make sure our JavaScript is recognizing that. It's not going to enable the next button until both of these questions now are answered. So that's perfect. Let's come back here. At this time, I think that we may have everything that we need. There will probably be at some point some more changes here. So for example, if we have a survey that's been taken already and we want to show those results in this type of question, I'm going to need a way of, for example, selecting the answer that was already given. And in this particular case, the answer is going to be a single one of these values, but we already know that we have a question type that allows multiple answers. So I'm wondering if right now I would just want to go ahead and take care of that and have the answers as this. It's an array. There isn't anything selected, but if we wanted to, we could select, for example, very satisfied. And then down here, we can adjust this template to add a checked box here. And this is getting a bit long, so I'm just going to break this up a little bit here. I have this, I have these values, this class. Here's my input. And I'm going to add another if statement. So it would be if, and I need some expression here, but if it is true, we're going to add checked. Otherwise, we're not. And what's the expression? The expression is going to be is if this allowed value is inside of this answers. So if it's in array, then I'm going to add that check. Let's just see if this works. I'm going to go back on over. I've set this so very satisfied should be selected. If I refresh this page, I'm not seeing that. Oh, because I put allowed values, which is my array. I really want allowed value. Let's try that again. And now I do see it. So let's go ahead and refresh. It should come in as it already checked. If I want to switch it to maybe one of the other ones, let's go to satisfied and I'll save. And now I start off with as a default value, I have that as satisfied. And then let's do one more where I don't have any answers at all. Let's go ahead and save that. And you can see it comes back and so nothing is selected initially. All right, let's come back to our markup. I think we're pretty good for this particular question. Now we went through this process of pulling out all these different properties and we put them at the top. We're gonna do the same thing for all the other questions. I'm gonna do that offline and then we'll just do a quick review of everything. All right, through the magic of the video, we have fast forward a little bit here, and you can see my work at the very bottom. I've used PHP Artisan make component for long text, slider, short text, the date, the star rating, URL, email, select multiple list, select one dropdown, and this is the one we started with. You can see all those new components here. And let's go ahead and look at the one we started with. So we started with the select one list. And as I refactored, I found out that there was another property that we needed. We needed a placeholder eventually. So I did pull that into all of them. And what you're going to see as we review each of these, you're going to see the same header at the very top. That same bit of PHP code is at the very top of every single one. And I did that on purpose because I want a common model eventually. I want it to be like a question model that I'm going to feed into these components, and then it will know how to render it. So let's just review these top to bottom here. So here's our date, has that same beginning part here. And then our date field is an input type of date. And then I use all of these properties up here to create this date. Email is the same thing. I started with the same properties at the very top, and I refactored it so that I'm using those properties here. Here's an example of the placeholder. So if you did provide a placeholder, for example, in this case we do, and it is going to be shown. Long text, same properties at the top. I've refactored it here. Nothing special about this. It's just a text area. Select multiple lists, same properties at the top again. So I do iterate over the allowed values. So here are the allowed values. And I create an input checkbox for each one of those. And I do see if the allowed value is in the answers. If it is, I check that checkbox. The select one drop down, again, same starting spot. It is a select. I then do enumerate over all of the allowed values, and I put the options in. And then I select the one that is found in the answers. Ideally in this, there's not a multiple. This is just going to be a single one that's selected, but you can have a default value then. We did select one list already, so let's do short text next. Same starting properties, and this is just an input, so it's not a text area, it's an input. Type text. All of them have the ID in the name, has the placeholder. The slider, same starting properties, same label at the top. I did have to make some assumptions for the slider that the allowed values property is going to be an array that has the min and the max value. So I extract those min and max values from that array. I get the current value from the answers. And that way I'm allowed to set the min and the max value for this input type of range. Star rating was a little bit more complex. It started with the same properties at the very top, the same label. I do extract out the current answer from a bit of PHP looking at the first value, or it's a 0 instead of a null. I'm hard coding it to 5 stars all the time. I suppose at some point in the future we could change this to maybe it's a 10-star rating, or you can make this like a variable, but we'll just leave that for another day. If you set the is required, I don't want is required on every single input, so each of these is a star. So the very first one is where it should be required. So the minimum number of stars is you have to at least select the very first one. And for the star rating, this is hidden. And what you really see are the stars themselves. And these stars here have a bit of logic to determine whether or not it's highlighted with yellow or like not highlighted with the gray. And then we're just showing that little star. And then finally, we have this URL component that starts with the same input properties, has the same label, input type is URL, has a placeholder, it's required. So if we close out all these components, let's come back to our survey. We'll just close everything but this. And now you can see in my survey, if I start at the very top and you start to look at the questions, I'm using my components. So here's the select one component, here's the select one dropdown. In the next section, I got select multiple list, and I got the email and the URL. And the next one, I have the star rating and the date and the short text. And then in the last one, I have the slider and the long text. There is one more section here that has conditional logic. But if you really look at this conditional logic, this parent question is really a select one from a list type of question. And this child question is really a long text question type. It's not a new question type, so I save these in place for now. Eventually we'll replace these with our components and tie them together with these data star attributes, but we're going to leave that for a different video. But I've cleaned up this survey quite a bit. It's using all my components where we can. Let's come back to our application. You can see the application now is still functioning. I can go through and I can select answers. I can select multiple. I can provide my email and my URL. I can select the number of stars. The date is still functioning. I can add a short comment here. The slider still functions, and we can select it. Right now, I think I've got it all the way up to 100. Can enter long feedback, text area. Here's the conditional one. We didn't change this, so this is the same thing. And then finally, we have our summary page, which we did not change, but it still functions. All right, so let's come back to our development environment, and we are going to close this out. And I'm going to come down to our Git tab here. Let's see where we're at here. We should have a bunch of new files. And then we have all these new files. There is a file that's in my video. That's the slide that's associated with this video. But I have all these new components, and we've modified our survey. So let's go ahead and add a message to this. This is video 04. Push these up. Let's go ahead and add the tag. And push tags up too. All right, so let's come back to our slides and see what's left for this. I did this already. We already tagged and we pushed our code up to the repository. Up next, we are going to dive deeper into our discussion about data models for the survey. And that's going to impact our components a little bit. So I want to leave these in this current state. And then after we get done with that discussion about the data model, we're going to refactor those components a bit. So we'll see you then.